Sonic 06 is the best Sonic game ever, and I'm tired of pretending like it isn't. You see this? This is absolute cinema! For the past 20 years, Sonic 06 has unfairly been the punching bag of the gaming community. Back in the early days of YouTube, reviewing this game was basically a rite of passage. You weren't considered a real YouTuber until you suffered through this game at least once. Even the angry video game nerd, someone who only sticks to games from the 80s and 90s, went out of his way to roast this thing. But history will remember the game for what it truly is. A misunderstood masterpiece of avant-garde gameplay that was ahead of its time. That looking back has aged beautifully, with everyone who mocked it lining up to apologize at its altar. It's the devs being praised as heroes who managed to pull off something unheard of, as the story behind this game is almost as legendary as the game itself. During development, one of Sonic's creators, Yuji Naka, left Sega and took a chunk of the team with him. The original plan was to release 06 on the Wii, Xbox 360, and PS3. But once Sega got the specs for the Wii, they realized that they would have to rebuild the entire game to get it running there. So instead, they decided to make a new game for the system, Sonic and the Secret Rings, pulling even more people off of 06, including the game's director. And despite all of that, Sega refused to delay the game, because doing so would miss Sonic's 15th anniversary, leaving those remaining with pretty much an impossible task. They had to finish a massive next-gen Sonic game with fewer people, a collapsing leadership, and basically no time. Yet against all odds, they somehow managed to do the impossible, creating one of, if not the best Sonic game ever made. And another reality. Yeah, this game isn't good. Its problems are infamous. Loading screens so long that it feels like you're waiting in line for a roller coaster. Silver's boss fight being one of the most unfair things ever put into a game, with that boss section qualifying as psychological warfare. And of course, this. It was so bad that by the end of it, it erased itself from Sonic's continuity. At this point, I don't think I could add anything to the conversation. It's been analyzed, dissected, and memed to death. So why am I talking about it now? And more importantly, why did I call it the best Sonic game ever made? Enter Sonic P06, an unofficial remake of the game made by ChaosX that seeks to fix the issues with the original and go above and beyond by adding extra and missing features, showing that the ideas presented in the original weren't bad, it was just rushed and unfinished. I've been following the project for years and wanted to get a better appreciation of what ChaosX had to overcome to pull this off. So I played through the original and oh boy, we do not give this man enough credit. Now I'm not going to review all of 06, just the stages that exist in both versions. As of the making of this video, the final story update for P06 isn't out yet, and ChaosX said he wouldn't be touching the story. And honestly, I don't blame him, as in order to make it tolerable, you'd have to rewrite the entire game from scratch. But before we tear this game apart, I want to acknowledge the few things 06 did right, because believe it or not, there are a couple. First of all, the graphics are impressive for their time. And the CGI cutscenes look incredible, even to this day. If I didn't know these were from 06, I'd absolutely want to play the game they came from. And Shadow's story is actually pretty solid. It builds up his arc from SA2, Heroes, and his own game. I like where it takes him and the conclusion he reaches by the end, with Mephiles being a gently creepy villain who challenges Shadow in all the right ways. No wonder people were hyped when he returned in Shadow Generations. Alright, that's enough positivity. Let's dissect this train wreck. But before we do so, please leave a like, subscribe, and turn bell notifications on, as playing 06 is a level of hell I wouldn't wish are my worst enemies. This game has 3 stories: Sonic, Shadow, and Silver. You spend most of your time playing as these 3 hedgehogs, occasionally switching to their companions ever so often. So let's kick things off, starting with the hedgehog this game is named after. Sonic! Out of the 3 hedgehogs, Sonic is easily the best, although that's not saying much considering this is 06. One thing you'll notice right out of the gate is how slow Sonic feels when compared to other Sonic games, which is a problem that every character suffers from, which is jarring as Sonic games are all about speed and momentum. Yet here he somehow feels stiff and slippery at the same time. The only time he actually goes fast is when you hit a boost pad, use some blue gem or enter a mock speed section. And trust me, we'll get to those. When Sonic does hit his top speed, he becomes even more slippery and harder to control, as I constantly found myself slamming straight into a wall whenever I tried to move quickly. Then there's Sonic's homing attack, which is painfully slow. He has to reach a certain height before he can perform another one. It has to face your target if you want to chain them together. And when there isn't a target, he just drops straight down. It also doesn't help that Sonic's other moves are mapped to the same button, which makes things incredibly awkward. You can't even perform a spin dash while running. Trying to do a light speed dash over the ocean? Well, too bad you bounced instead. Congratulations, you're dead. It's unreliable, and I dread every time I have to use it. He also has a spin kick and a kick slide, which are both equally unreliable. And sometimes when you kick, you slide instead. And don't even get me started on the sequence breaking. This game is absolutely littered with it. The amount of times I die to something random or not working is insane. Everything can be going perfectly fine and then suddenly, boom, you're dead, with no rhyme or reason. Then we have the gems. These are exclusive to Sonic and give him additional abilities once you buy them, like the white gem that lets you charge your homing attack, the red gem that slows down time, or the infamous purple gem, which shrinks you and unlocks an entirely new set of glitches, in which ChaosX had to completely change so it doesn't break the game. I didn't bother grinding for them in 06, but they can be fun to use in P06, although there's something funny I should mention. Since the game never programmed a limit for them, you can use these abilities indefinitely. To spice things up, Sonic also has standing and Mach speed sections, as well as levels where he carries Elise. You lose access to most of your abilities when carrying her, but you do get a shield that you can use to block enemy attacks and use to ram into them, but just like everything else in this game, it's unreliable. Not to mention, you can't even jump that high while it's active. The static sections are pretty miserable. Sonic feels slippery, the turn radius is tiny, and his jumps feel delayed. It's a pretty unpleasant experience, but that's nothing compared to the Mach speed sections. Cause oh boy, are these torture. These are easily the worst part of the game. Sonic automatically runs forward at top speed, leaving you barely any time to react. Combine that with his tiny turn radius and the fact that you can't control him at all while he's jumping means you're going to die. A lot. You can go faster with his light speed dash, but you shouldn't, as Sonic becomes impossible to control. The safest way to survive these sections is to ironically not go fast. Then there are Sonic's companions. Tails is the one you play as the most. His only attack is throwing ring bombs, and the best way to use them is when he's flying so you can spam them, but you can't pick them up, making it hard to tell which rings are real and which ones are from his bombs. His flight also feels weird, as he can only go up to a certain height before dropping back down, with there being no indicator on how long he can fly. Then there's Knuckles, which honestly, I don't have much to say about. You only pass him twice, with both of his sections being extremely short. In fact, I have more complaints about the level design than I do about Knuckles himself. Okay, there has to be something I can complain about regarding Knuckles. Let me see here. His hits sometimes don't register. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, that's it for Sonic, the best of the worst of the three. Which raises the question, how exactly did ChaosX fix him in P06? One of the biggest changes he made was making Sonic and everyone else faster, as the difference is immediately noticeable. Sonic actually has momentum now, and the game does a much better job of capturing the sense of speed you expect from a Sonic title. The light speed dash and bounce attack are also tied to different buttons, which removes a lot of the frustration. You can even kick and slide properly now, as well as use the spin dash while running. His homing attacks are faster and easier to chain, making combat feel much smoother. You also have more control during Mach speed sections. He has a larger turn radius, and you can actually steer him while jumping. It can even slow down by bouncing, which helps a lot. It now feels like an actual level instead of a punishment. Even the sliding sections feel better now, as it feels like you have control over Sonic. Instead of sliding around like a shopping cart on ice, he even added a kick to help Sonic speed up. And the shield during Alicia's levels actually work. If you want a perfect example of everything P06 fixes, just look at Crisis City. In the original, it showcased everything wrong with Sonic's gameplay. But in P06, it showcases everything ChaosX improved upon, turning one of the worst levels in the game into one of its best. Tails also received a major overhaul. He can now attack with his tails like in Sonic Adventure, and his flight is tied to the action meter, so you know how long you can stay airborne. His ring bombs also lock onto enemies while flying instead of dropping straight down, and they fall flat on the ground, making them easier to teleport from regular rings. And Knuckles! Well, his hits register now. But ChaosX didn't stop there, as he added new mechanics like a combo system to keep things interesting. You can chain attacks to build up your score, but once Sonic's feet touch the ground, the chain ends. He also restored cut sequences, like the intro scene in Crisis City where Sonic and Shadow briefly talk. And instead of buying the gems in the shop like in the original, they're now hidden throughout the stage, giving you a reason to explore them, which is a nice callback to the adventure era and rewards exploration. There's even a completion bonus. Collect all 7 gems in S-Rank every stage, and you unlock Super Sonic. And he works exactly how you would expect. Get 50 ranks and he becomes an unstoppable force that's able to one-shot even the toughest of enemies, while boosting through the levels at insane speed. Overall, ChaosX did an outstanding job at fixing Sonic's campaign. While the original footballed in every possible way, PO6 proves that the ideas were always there. The devs just didn't have the time or resources to see it through to the finish. Now let's see if ChaosX can work the same miracle with the second hedgehog. As believe it or not, Sonic's campaign is actually the least broken one. Shadow. Unlike Sonic, Shadow is more combat-oriented, which is something I have to commend the devs for. It gives Shadow his own identity, something the last 2 games this year didn't bother to do. Since Shadow's gameplay leans heavily into combat, he can perform combo attacks, use Chaos Spear to stun enemies, and activate Chaos Boost to power up his attacks. He can even perform a tornado kick while standing, although I never used this attack in either version, as the combo attacks he uses after a homing dash are way more efficient. Why they added this move is beyond me. Unlike Sonic, the issues with Shadow are way more obvious the moment you start playing. He's a bit slower than Sonic, and some of his attacks don't even register, with his first and last attacks being prime examples. His homing attack is somewhat less reliable than Sonic's, missing enemies completely. Then there's Chaos Boost. There are 3 levels to it. Level 1 transforms your homing attack into a Chaos Snap, allowing you to warp directly to enemies. Level 2, which allows Chaos Spear to deal damage. And Level 3 allows you to use Chaos Blast, which is supposed to wipe out everything around you, but... yeah, it's embarrassing. The meter for it throws painfully slow, which makes neither status drag on if you don't have it activated, especially since the purple monsters you encounter later have massive health bars. But it's a double-edged sword, because Chaos Snap is basically uncontrollable and will happily warp you to your death. However, his melee attacks only increase if you hit level 3, so you're stuck in this weird situation where you want a Chaos Boost, but using it can also get you killed. So it's either you go all the way to level 3 or don't even bother, as the risk isn't worth it if you don't have it unlocked. Luckily, this is where the game's bad programming comes in to save us. Just like with Sonic's meter, Shadow's is broken too, meaning you can jump to Chaos Boost level 3 instantly. Just like in his own game, Shadow can also use vehicles. And yeah, they're not great here either. Shadow has 4 vehicles he can use: a buggy, glider, motorcycle, and hovercraft, all equipped with guns. The buggy feels slow and clunky and is awkward to control. The glider is basically an auto shooter that constantly pulls you towards the center, so you can just press A to boost and coast to the end. The motorcycle is easily the worst. Its turn radius is way too wide, and it feels like you're driving on ice. Thankfully, the devs realized how terrible it was, as you only have to use it once throughout the entire game. The hovercraft is the best out of the 4, mostly because you can destroy parts of Kingdom Valley and Wave Ocean with it, which is pretty fun, but that little bit of fun disappears quickly once you realize that if any debris falls on you, you instantly die. And it gets even worse in Dusty Desert, where you have to navigate the sandhills in this thing. As for Shadow's companions, his campaign does a better job at using them more than Sonic's or Silver's companions, which is both a blessing and a curse. First, there's Rouge. Just like in SA2, she can glide and climb walls. However, getting off of them can be quite frustrating as it feels like she's glued to them. Her only means of attack is by throwing bombs. And just like with Tails, the best way to use them is in the air, since you can throw a bunch of them if you hold down the attack button. One thing I like about Rouge is that some of her stages resemble her SA2 treasure hunting levels, as her jungle level is essentially a big open area. Although that level gives you too much freedom, as you can beat it in just over a minute. Next is Omega, who has the most variety in his moveset. He can shoot cannons from his hands, and has a lock-on attack for shooting enemies from a distance. It can also glide, but it feels incredibly awkward since you move so slowly with it. Plus, your jumps carry no momentum. Not to mention, when you're on the ground, your cannons have no range. It can even miss at point blank, which makes the best method of attack being, you guessed it, from the air. While it doesn't hit the same lows as Sonic's, it also doesn't hit the same highs. So what did ChaosX do to fix him? Well, the first fix was simple. Just like with Sonic, he sped Shadow up and gave him back his spin dash, which I actually used more here than I did in Sonic's campaign. Shadow's attacks now have weight behind them, and Chaos Boost actually increases your damage output. And unlike the original where you can jump straight to Chaos Boost level 3, here you have to work for it, as PO6 adds an extra meter you have to fill to get to the next level. And when you look at that, Chaos Blast actually works now. Combat in general feels way more rewarding. You can rack up a ton of points by cheating some nasty combos through Chaos Step and Chaos Spear, which makes Shadow feel like the ultimate life form, which I absolutely love. But there is a funny side effect. Because of how easy it is to rack up points, Shadow becomes the easiest to S rank. You can die midway through a level and still walk away with an S rank, which is an issue that could easily be fixed by raising the score requirements. As for vehicles, Chaos actually moved the buggy entirely, which is great because the levels you use it in are much better without it. The other vehicles control better as well. You can actually steer using the glider, and the breeze no longer instantly kills you in the hovercraft. However, the motorcycle still isn't great, and the hovercraft in Dusty Desert is still rough, but it's far more bearable than before. Rouge also received several improvements here. She gets her SA2 moveset back, allowing her to kick enemies, her bombs travel farther, and she can glide longer instead of dropping like a rock. Her treasure hunting stages also resemble the ones from SA2 much more closely, with the keys changing location each time you play, and her jungle stage now feels like a proper adventure-style hunting level. Omega also got some major improvements. He runs faster and his jumps now carry momentum, meaning he can glide properly. He also has a nasty melee attack that does a ton of damage, and resembles his moveset from Sonic Heroes. And his knockout shots now has an indicator, although I still prefer his air attack, as it can hit multiple enemies while doing massive damage. Unlike Sonic, Shadow doesn't get many upgrades. The only one he does get are the inhibitor rings, which you also unlock by S-ranking each stage. These make Shadow incredibly powerful and temporarily invincible, but your action meter drains incredibly fast. And when it empties, Shadow becomes paralyzed for a short time. Sadly, this is the weakest of the completion rewards. The levels aren't large enough with there not being enough enemies to take advantage of it. And since Chaos Boost level 3 is already so powerful, you don't really need it. Overall, Shadow's campaign is a massive improvement. ChaosX managed to turn this messy, glitch-filled campaign into something genuinely fun. Which brings us to the most problematic hedgehog in 06, the one everyone down in ChaosX could even fix. Silver! Oh boy, where do I begin with this one? For starters, Silver is slow. And while I said that about Sonic and Shadow, Silver moves like absolute molasses. I knew I was in for a rough time when this first level took 10 minutes to finish. I repeat, 10 minutes. And as crazy as it sounds, some are even longer. His shortest stages take about as long as Sonic and Shadow's longest, with his final level taking me 30 minutes to complete. In no universe should Sonic games be this slow. The biggest problem with Silver is that he doesn't have many tools to deal with enemies, not helped by the fact that he isn't as mobile as Sonic or Shadow. To attack, Silver uses psychic abilities to grab objects and throw them at enemies, which sounds cool, until you realize that it relies on the game's physics engine. And as you expect, it's a disaster. His aim isn't accurate, objects fly everywhere, it's a mess. The best way to deal with enemies is to stun and throw them, but the problem is that you have to get really close to do that, which usually results in you taking damage. So the best strategy becomes throw everything including the kitchen sink at them, which becomes a problem in later levels where enemies turn into damage sponges. Silver can also levitate, which lets him float through the air, but because he's so slow and the meter drains incredibly fast, he can't travel any meaningful distance. And ironically, Silver's action meter is the only one that actually works in the entire game. And then there's the ball puzzle. Ugh. The idea is to knock this ball into the hole at the end of the hallway within 10 hits while avoiding pitfalls. Sounds simple, right? However, there's a reason this section is still haunting people 20 years later. The physics don't work, the ball barely moves, and sometimes you lose a hit for no reason. I got lucky and beat it in 10 minutes, but I've heard horror stories of people being stuck here for over 30 minutes. Silver's campaign also lacks gameplay variety. See what you want about Sonic's Mach speed sections or Shadow's vehicles, but at least they change things up. Other than him switching between his companions, there isn't much to break up the monotony. Speaking of companions, let's talk about them. First up is Amy, who is easily the worst companion in the entire game. She's slow, her double jumps carry almost no distance, and has to completely stop in order to attack. Thankfully, the devs realized how awful she is, so you only have to play as her 3 times in the entire game. Then there's Blaze, who ironically is the best part of Silver's campaign, mostly because she feels like an actual Sonic character. She has a double jump, a fire tornado to take down hordes of enemies, as well as a spinning claw attack that serves as her homing attack. It can be used to leap large distances, but it's not really that good since you fall straight down after you use it. So yeah, Silver's campaign is a disaster of massive proportions, which just goes to show you how much of a monumental task ChaosX had ahead of him. Unlike the other characters here, the only mainline game Silver's been playable in is this one. And what do you even do for a completion bonus for him? So the thought going into Silver's update was, can you fix something this fundamentally broken? And the answer is yes, if you remake the entire game from scratch. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that the reason why ChaosX works so well is because ChaosX rebuilt the entire game from the ground up, which sounds unbelievable until you play Silver and realize he no longer feels like a form of torture. Throwing objects feels far more accurate, making his core gameplay feel more reliable. This also gave ChaosX the chance to improve the visuals, making ChaosX look way better than the original. It even allowed him to adjust the mood of certain stages, like changing the time of day for Blaze's wave ocean, or desaturating Shadow and Silver's aquatic base to show that they're in the past. But back to Silver, while ChaosX did a lot to fix him, the character still isn't perfect. Silver still has issues, but considering what ChaosX had to work with, I think he did the best anyone could have done. Just like with Sonic and Shadow, ChaosX sped Silver up, but he did it in a clever way that fits his character. Silver now uses his psychic abilities to propel himself forward. This alone is a massive improvement as it cuts his stage time in half, making his levels far less exhausting. Silver's moveset was also expanded. ChaosX realized, just like I did, the best way to deal with enemies is to stun and throw them. So he leaned into that idea. Silver now has a psychic shot that he can use from a distance to stun enemies, along with a psychic shock that stuns enemies around him. It's a bit overpowered in my opinion, but I'll take this over the alternative we had in the original game, which was none. Enemies are no longer sponges, and Silver can actually travel meaningful distances while levitating, making his levels far more enjoyable. But was ChaosX able to fix the ball puzzle? Well, kind of. He improved it by giving the ball proper physics, making it move faster, and adding barriers. It's still frustrating, but hey, I'll give him props for trying. As for Silver's companions, Amy now has her SA1 moveset and is far more agile. Her double jump actually covers distance, and she can attack enemies while airborne, making her generally fun to play, and it makes me wish I could play more as her. Blaze functions pretty much the same as in the original, which makes sense as her gameplay already had a solid foundation. All ChaosX had to do was simply refine her mechanics and remove the bugs. Just like with Sonic, Silver also has upgrades scattered throughout the levels. One of them is the spin jump, which lets him jump higher and gives him another way to attack. I'm not a huge fan of this upgrade, as it feels like something Silver should have had from the start. You can also unlock the Psychic Smash, which unleashes a deadly knife decimating everything it touches. ChaosX pulled this move straight from Silver's boss fight in Sonic's generations, and it fits perfectly. For its completion bonus, Silver unlocks the Singer of Awakening. When you fill the second meter, Silver releases an ESP blast and transforms into ESP Silver, which is actually a form from Sonic Runners, something I didn't know until doing research for this video. In this form, Silver gains a 33% discount on psychic abilities, able to reflect projectiles, and stun enemies when he gets close to them. While it's not as flashy as the other completion bonuses, I actually think this is better than Shadow's inhibitor rings. It's easier to activate, and it lets you do some crazy stuff, like skipping large portions of the level, or wiping out entire groups of enemies. ChaosX pulled off a miracle with Silver. He redeemed that character entirely and turned him into something that's actually fun to play, which is something I didn't think was possible. Overall, Sonic 06 is just as bad as everyone says. But one thing people didn't really talk about until PO6 came along is that the game actually had some generally great ideas. I can absolutely see a world where, if none of the development disasters happened, 06 would have gone down as one of the best Sonic games ever. But we don't live in that reality. Instead, we got a buggy, unfinished mess that tarnished Sonic's reputation for years. And that's what makes PO6 so fascinating, as this is the closest thing we'll ever get to that alternate timeline. It shows that the team behind 06 actually had something. They just didn't have the time, resources, or leadership to finish it. ChaosX managed to take the ideas the original developers were aiming for and actually realize them, while adding a few caveats of his own. From fixing Sonic's movement, to improving Shadow's combat, to entirely reworking and redeeming Silver. And like I said earlier, the project isn't finished. We still have the last story update, which I'll definitely be covering when it comes out. On top of that, the Sonic modding community has already created a huge number of mods and custom stages that expands this game even further, which has me excited to see what the future of this game will bring. So where do I place these two games on a tier list? Sonic 06 is obviously F tier, but as for PO6, I place it in A tier. After playing through all of this, one question kept nagging me. If ChaosX was able to perform a miracle and fix 06, would he be able to do the same thing and fix Sonic Boom?